The low, resonant hum of the fleet carrier Olympus was a constant. A vibration felt more in the bones than heard with the ears. It was the sound of a leviathan moving through the silent, abyssal dark of the Veil Nebula. On the bridge, the air was thick with controlled tension. Every officer stood ramrod straight, their faces illuminated by the cool blue and amber light of their consoles. They were a portrait of military perfection, a sea of crisp, gray uniforms and polished boots. And then there was her. She stood by a secondary diagnostics panel near the aft bulkhead, a place usually reserved for junior technicians. She wore a simple, graphite-colored maintenance jumpsuit, the fabric worn soft at the elbows and knees. Her hands, calloused and flecked with what looked like dried hydraulic fluid, moved with a quiet economy over the interface. Her hair, streaked with silver, was tied back in a severe, practical knot. Scars, thin and white as spider silk, traced the corners of her eyes, relics of a past that didn't belong on the pristine, orderly bridge of a flagship. She was an anomaly, a smudge of grease on a polished lens. Admiral Marcus Thorne paced the command deck like a caged tiger. His uniform was immaculate, his face a granite mask of authority. Every line on his face was a testament to decades of command, of sending ships into fire and waiting for them to return. He tolerated no errors, no deviations. His eyes swept the bridge, missing nothing, and they repeatedly snagged on the woman in the jumpsuit. She was a discordant note in his symphony of order. "Commander Tanaka," he clipped, his voice low but carrying the full weight of his rank. "Report from the long-range sensor array." Commander Eva Tanaka, his executive officer, pivoted in her chair. "No change, Admiral. The signature remains constant. 5 capital-class vessels, unknown configuration. They are holding their position just outside the nebula's gravimetric shadow. And our fighter wing, Viper Squadron, is on hot standby, sir. Lieutenant Miller is lead." Thorne grunted, a sound of grudging approval. Jack's hotshot Miller was arrogant, but he was the best of the new generation. A natural. Thorne's gaze drifted back to the woman. "And remind me again why a maintenance tech is occupying space on my command bridge during a potential threat condition." Tanaka's fingers paused over her console. "Major Rostova is the lead technical advisor for the XF-99 prototype, sir. She requested bridge access to monitor its system's integration with the ship's primary network in real time." "Major?" Thorne's eyebrows shot up. The title seemed absurd when paired with the grease-stained jumpsuit. "An advisor. She looks more like she's here to fix a clogged conduit." A few junior officers exchanged smirks. In the corner of the bridge, Lieutenant Miller, patched in via a ready-room comms channel, let out a soft chuckle that was just loud enough to be heard. "Tell the Major not to spill her coffee on the new bird's neural interface," he quipped. Eva Rostova gave no indication she had heard. Her focus was absolute, her eyes tracing the flow of energy schematics on her screen. She saw the ship not as a vessel, but as a living organism. She could feel the subtle fluctuations in the power grid, the faint tremor of the inertial dampeners struggling against the nebula's currents. She was listening to the ship's heartbeat, and she didn't like its rhythm. It was strained, tense. Something was wrong, not with the ship, but with the silence outside. The enemy was too quiet, too still. It was the predatory stillness of a snake before it strikes. The dismissal from the Admiral and the mockery from the pilots were like the background hum of the engines, present but irrelevant. They were noise. The data was the signal, and the signal was telling her that this was not a standoff. It was a trap. Her posture didn't change, but a deep, cold focus settled over her, a state of mind she hadn't inhabited for years. It was like slipping into a worn, familiar coat, one she had hoped never to wear again. The quiet life of a technical advisor was supposed to be her epilogue, the long, slow fade after a story written in fire and velocity. But the universe, it seemed, was not yet finished with her. A sudden, piercing shriek from the tactical console ripped through the bridge's tense quiet. "Alert!" the sensor officer yelled, his voice cracking. Multiple new contacts, ejecting from the lead enemy vessel. They're small, high velocity, and they're coming right for us. On the main view screen, the image magnified. Dozens of tiny, black shapes detached from the distant ships, accelerating at impossible speeds. They were sleek, angular, and utterly menacing. "They're not missiles," Tanaka reported, her voice tight with disbelief. "They're drones. Stealth profile. Minimal heat signature. Our point defense systems can't get a solid lock." Thorne's face hardened. "He's trying to bleed us. Send out the fighters. I want those things swatted out of the sky before they get within firing range." He stabbed a finger towards the tactical plot. "Scramble Viper Squadron. Now!" The klaxon for a general quarters alert began to blare, its urgent, rhythmic cry echoing through the ship. But another crisis was already unfolding. A medical officer's voice came over the internal comm, sharp with urgency. "Medical to bridge. We have an emergency in the pilot's ready room. Lieutenant Commander Phillips just collapsed. Severe symptoms of decompression sickness. He must have a faulty seal on his suit." A cold dread settled on the bridge. Phillips wasn't just any pilot. He was the designated pilot for the XF-99 Wraith, the only fighter on the Olympus equipped with the advanced quantum sensor suite capable of tracking the new stealth drones. Without him, the rest of the squadron would be flying blind, firing at ghosts. Thorne's knuckles went white where he gripped the command rail. "Get me another pilot for the Wraith. Who's his backup?" Commander Tanaka's face was pale. She frantically scanned her datapad. "Sir, there is no designated backup. The Wraith's neural interface is calibrated to a single pilot's biometric and neurological profile. Recalibration takes 12 hours. Phillips was the only one certified." The first drone impacts rocked the ship. Distant, percussive thuds that vibrated through the deck plates. The outer shields flared, absorbing the kinetic energy, but the ship's power levels dipped precariously with each hit. The drones were faster and more numerous than anticipated. "Viper Squadron is engaging," the comms officer announced, "but they're having trouble tracking the targets. Lieutenant Miller reports they're like trying to shoot shadows." Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle the edges of the bridge's disciplined atmosphere. Thorne's mind raced through options, each one worse than the last. They could retreat, but the drones were faster than the Olympus. They could try to weather the storm, but their shields wouldn't last forever. They were a billion-credit warship being pecked to death by gnats. It was into this rising tide of fear that a calm, quiet voice spoke. "I can fly it, Admiral." Every head on the bridge turned. Major Eva Rostova had stepped away from her console. She stood in the center of the command deck, her expression unreadable, her hands loose at her sides. The grease-stained jumpsuit seemed almost profane in the face of the unfolding crisis. Thorne stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. His face contorted with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You?" he barked, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're a technician. A mechanic." "I'm certified on the airframe, sir," Eva said, her tone even, betraying no emotion. "I know its systems better than anyone." The Admiral's face flushed a deep, dangerous crimson. The sheer audacity of the suggestion, in the middle of a battle, was an affront to his entire worldview, to the rigid order of command he had built his life upon. "Certified?" he roared, his voice echoing across the now-silent bridge. "Who in their right mind authorized this grease monkey to pilot our most advanced, multi-billion-credit experimental fighter? Commander, get her off my bridge. Find me a real pilot, or so help me God. I will have you both scrubbing plasma conduits for the rest of your careers." The air crackled with the Admiral's rage. The bridge crew flinched, all eyes avoiding the woman in the center of the storm. But Commander Tanaka didn't look away. She was staring at her datapad, her eyes wide, a flicker of dawning comprehension on her face. She had cross-referenced Rostova's personnel file with the XF-99's development records. The pieces were clicking into place. "Sir," Tanaka said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the Admiral's fury like a laser. She looked up from her screen, her gaze fixed on Thorne. "With Lieutenant Commander Phillips incapacitated," She is the only other qualified pilot on this ship. In this sector, for that matter. Thorn's tirade died in his throat. He stared at Tanaka, then at Rostova. He saw the quiet confidence in the older woman's eyes, a stillness that was utterly at odds with the chaos erupting around them. It was the confidence of someone who knew something he didn't. He hated it, but desperation was a powerful motivator. The Olympus shuddered again, a more violent impact this time. An alarm blared as the port shield generator overloaded. "Fine," he snarled, the word tasting like acid. He pointed a trembling finger at Eva. "Get her in that cockpit. But I swear to you, Major, if you so much as scratch the paint on that prototype, you will regret it for the rest of your very short, very miserable life." Eva simply nodded once, a curt, economical gesture. Without another word, she turned and walked towards the bridge exit, her worn boots making no sound on the deck. The doors hissed shut behind her, leaving a stunned and silent bridge in her wake. Admiral Thorn was left staring at the tactical display, at the swarm of red icons closing in on his ship, having just entrusted its survival to a ghost in a mechanic's jumpsuit. The walk to the hangar bay was a journey through the ship's nervous system. Red alert lights painted the corridors in pulsing, hellish strokes. Crew members sprinted past, their faces grim. Eva moved against the current, a calm stone in a frantic river. She didn't run. Her pace was deliberate, measured. Panic was a luxury, an indulgence she had discarded decades ago. When she entered Hangar Bay 3, the wall of controlled chaos hit her. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and superheated metal. Ground crews swarmed around the remaining Viper fighters, reloading munitions and patching minor damage. In the center of it all, sitting in its launch cradle like a dormant predator, was the XF-99 Wraith. It was less a machine and more a shard of solidified night, its composite hull absorbing the light, its angles all wrong, designed to defy radar and the eye itself. The flight boss, a grizzled chief petty officer with a face like a clenched fist, saw her approach. He held up a hand. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area. All non-essential personnel." His voice trailed off as he took in the jumpsuit, then the look in her eyes. "The Admiral sent me," Eva said simply. "I'm flying the Wraith." The chief's jaw went slack. He looked around, as if expecting someone to tell him this was a joke. The ground crew nearest them stopped what they were doing, their tools held aloft, their expressions a mixture of confusion and disbelief. From beside one of the Vipers, Lieutenant Jax Miller appeared, his helmet tucked under his arm. Sweat plastered his dark hair to his forehead, but his trademark smirk was still in place, though it was strained. "You've got to be kidding me," he said, his voice a low, incredulous laugh. "They're sending the wrench-turner?" He looked Eva up and down, his gaze lingering on the grease stains on her sleeve. "With all due respect, ma'am, this isn't a simulator. Don't break our new toy before we even get to play with it properly." Eva met his gaze. She said nothing. There was no anger in her eyes, no defensiveness. There was nothing at all but a profound, unnerving calm. She walked past him to the Wraith's boarding ladder. A young crewman, no older than 20, hesitantly held out a flight helmet and an oxygen mask. "Your gear, Major." Eva took it, her movements fluid and practiced. She began her pre-flight check, her hands gliding over the Wraith skin, checking the integrity of the sensor pylons, the seals on the cockpit canopy, the alignment of the ventral thrusters. Her touch was not that of a pilot, but of a creator. She knew every seam, every rivet. The ground crew watched, their skepticism slowly giving way to a grudging respect. Her inspection was more thorough, more intimate than any they had ever witnessed. She wasn't just checking a machine, she was communing with it. She climbed the ladder and settled into the cockpit. The interior was Spartan, dominated by a holographic display and the two grips of the neural interface. For most pilots, the direct mind-to-machine link was disorienting, a flood of sensory data that could induce vertigo and nausea. For Eva, it was like coming home. She placed her hands on the grips. The cockpit sealed with a hiss, plunging her into a silent, insulated world. A soft chime indicated the neural link was active. Data flooded her senses, not as a chaotic stream, but as an intuitive extension of her own body. She could feel the ship's structural integrity, taste the fuel mixture, hear the faint quantum hum of the sensor suite. The Wraith was no longer a machine she was piloting. It was her body. She had wings of shadow and claws of light. On the bridge, the situation had deteriorated. Another shield generator had failed. The drones were breaking through the Viper's ragged defense line. Miller's voice, now stripped of all arrogance, crackled over the comm. "I can't get a lock. They're too agile. Viper 3 is hit. His engines are gone. Viper 4. Cover him. Get him back to the ship." The tactical display was a nightmare of converging red vectors. Thorn gripped the railing, his face a mask of cold fury and dawning horror. They were losing. His flagship, the pride of the Third Fleet, was being dismantled piece by piece. "Launch the prototype," he commanded, his voice a low growl. "Launch it now." The magnetic catapult on the flight deck engaged with a deafening roar. In the cockpit, Eva felt the immense buildup of energy. She braced, not against the G-forces, but with them, becoming one with the acceleration. The Wraith was shot from the belly of the Olympus like a hypervelocity round, a black streak against the swirling chaos of the nebula. The sudden, brutal silence of the void replaced the roar of the launch. Eva hung in space for a full 3 seconds, a moment of perfect stillness. She wasn't a pilot in a dogfight. She was a master surgeon surveying a complex and lethal operating theater. The swarm of drones, the crippled Viper fighters, the lumbering form of the Olympus. It all resolved itself in her mind not as chaos, but as a complex equation of vectors, velocities, and probabilities. She saw the patterns in their flight paths, the fractional second delays in their targeting algorithms, the resonant frequencies of their shield emitters. Miller's frantic voice cut through the silence. "Watch your 6 prototype. They're all over me. I'm breaking off." Eva's only response was a single, permissive click of her comm. Then she acted. The Wraith didn't accelerate forward. It didn't bank or roll. It did something that defied conventional physics and the training of every pilot watching. It executed a perfect, instantaneous zero-vector flip, rotating on its central axis while simultaneously firing its lateral thrusters in a controlled, explosive burst. The maneuver should have torn the ship apart and turned its pilot into a red smear against the cockpit's back wall. The G-force meter on the bridge's tactical display spiked into a region marked only by a skull and crossbones, then dropped back to 0. On the bridge, the tactical officer gasped, his voice choked with awe. "Sir, that's impossible. That's not a programmed maneuver. It's not in any of the simulators." Thorn said nothing. He could only stare, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. In a single, fluid motion, Eva had positioned the Wraith behind the entire enemy swarm. They were laid out before her, their engines now facing her, their defenses pointing the wrong way. She still didn't fire. She pushed the Wraith's engines to a cold burn, gliding silently, a ghost in their wake. She was hurting them. She opened a private channel to Miller. "Viper lead, get your birds clear." Now her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, an order, not a request. Miller, disoriented and struggling to control his damaged fighter, could only stammer, "Clear? We're falling back." "Negative," Eva's voice replied. "Clear the entire engagement zone. A9 through G4. You have 30 seconds. Then she began her work. The Wraith's twin energy cannons began to pulse, not with the chaotic spray of a desperate dogfight, but with the rhythmic precision of a metronome. Each shot was a pinprick of brilliant blue light. Each pinprick found its mark. She wasn't targeting the drone's hulls. That was inefficient. She was targeting the microscopic shield emitters, firing into the precise nanosecond they cycled, causing a cascading overload that vaporized each drone from the inside out. One shot, one kill. Pop, pop, pop. A string of silent, blossoming fireballs. She weaved through the thinning swarm, her movements a form of lethal ballet. The Wraith seemed to bend space around it, its thrusters firing in microscopic, impossibly complex bursts. She used the expanding plasma clouds from her kills as cover, ducking behind one explosion to line up a shot on a drone on the other side. She fired a shot that intentionally glanced off the wreckage of one drone, the superheated particle beam ricocheting at a perfect angle to slice through two more drones flying in formation. Miller, his fighter now limping at a safe distance, watched his tactical display with a sense of profound, soul-shaking inadequacy. His own struggles, his own pride, seemed like a child's game in the face of what he was witnessing. The Wraith was a phantom, an avenging angel, and its pilot was something beyond human. He saw the Wraith perform a maneuver he had only ever read about in historical texts, a move considered a theoretical impossibility, a legend from the Academy. A cascade burn. Eva targeted a piece of dense wreckage from a destroyed drone. She fired a low-power burst at its edge, the impact creating a small, focused explosion. The shockwave of that explosion, precisely calculated, struck the Wraith's flank and pushed it into a sharp, unpowered 90-degree turn, allowing her to avoid a pincer attack from the last half-dozen drones without using her own thrusters or revealing her energy signature. It was a move of such sublime, suicidal genius that it bordered on art. On the bridge of the Olympus there was absolute silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the life support systems and the soft, rhythmic popping sound from the tactical speaker as, one by one, the red icons vanished from the screen. The entire crew, from the lowest ensign to Admiral Thorne himself, stood frozen, their eyes locked on the main view screen. They were watching a ghost at work, a myth made real. Thorne's hands, which had been gripping the rail so tightly his knuckles were bone-white, slowly relaxed. The rage, the disbelief, the rigid certainty of his world. It was all dissolving, replaced by a single, overwhelming question that echoed in the silent chambers of his mind. Who is she? The last Reaper drone, isolated and confused, tried to flee. It executed a desperate, high-G burn back towards its mother ship. The Wraith didn't pursue. It simply rotated on its axis, and a single, final pulse of blue light crossed the void. The drone vanished in a silent, brilliant flash. And then, there was stillness. The battle was over. The space around the Olympus was littered with the glittering, cooling debris of the drone swarm. The enemy capital ships, their primary weapons seemingly spent, began a slow, deliberate retreat back into the depths of the nebula. A collective, shuddering breath was released on the bridge. The tension that had held them all in its grip for an impossibly long time finally snapped. Officers sagged against their consoles, their faces slick with sweat. The immediate threat was gone, but the aftershock of what they had witnessed remained. Admiral Thorne stood rigid, his gaze still fixed on the single blue icon representing the XF-99 Wraith as it began a slow, graceful turn back towards the carrier. The fury was gone from his face, replaced by a deep, unsettling confusion. The performance he had just seen was not merely competent. It was not even brilliant. It was transcendent. It was the work of a legend, and it had come from the hands of a woman he had dismissed as a mechanic. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a rough, gravelly thing, stripped of its usual commanding bark. "Tanaka," he said, not taking his eyes off the screen. "Identify that pilot. I want her full service record." Now he paused, his voice dropping lower. "And I don't care what level of clearance it takes. Use my command override. I want to know who the hell I just put in that cockpit." Commander Tanaka was already ahead of him. Her fingers flew across her console, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. She had a suspicion, a wild, unbelievable theory that had been forming since she'd first seen Rostova's name listed as a project advisor. She entered Thorne's override codes. The system hesitated for a moment, processing the flag officer level request. Then, a heavily redacted file flickered onto her private screen. She read through the basic information, her breath catching in her throat. Name, Rostova, Eva. Rank, Major, Reserve Designation, Inactive. Current assignment, Lead Technical and Systems Development Advisor, Project Wraith, XF-99. This explained the jumpsuit, her intimate knowledge of the fighter. She wasn't just an advisor, she was one of its creators. But that wasn't the part that made Tanaka's heart hammer against her ribs. She scrolled down, past commendations that were just black bars of redacted text, past mission logs that were classified beyond even the Admiral's clearance. She was looking for one thing, and then she found it, a single line of text near the bottom of the file, listed under historical designations. Primary call sign, decommissioned Ghost Viper 1. A soft gasp escaped Tanaka's lips. She looked up from her console, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. The name was a legend, a ghost story whispered in the barracks and flight simulators. A name from the darkest days of the Outer Rim sieges 20 years ago. Ghost Viper 1. The pilot who had single-handedly held the line at the siege of Cygnus X-1, flying a hopelessly outmatched starfighter for 72 hours straight. The pilot who had flown a crippled scout ship through the Orion Nebula's lethal radiation storms to deliver the intelligence that saved the entire 7th Fleet from a perfectly laid trap. The pilot credited with more solo kills in an unshielded Fury-class interceptor than any squadron in the fleet's history. A pilot who had vanished after a final, deeply classified mission near the core worlds. Most assumed she was dead. The rest thought she'd been given a quiet, comfortable desk job, a footnote in a history book that few were cleared to read. No one imagined she was here on the Olympus, wearing a mechanic's jumpsuit. "Sir," Tanaka said, her voice trembling slightly. She turned her screen so the Admiral could see. Thorne leaned over, his eyes scanning the file. He read the name, the rank, the assignment. Then he saw the call sign. Ghost Viper 1. The name hit him like a physical blow. He physically recoiled from the console, stumbling back a step. The blood drained from his face. He remembered the briefings from when he was a young captain. He remembered the hushed, reverent tones the instructors used when they spoke of her. They used her tactical readouts as impossible benchmarks in the War College, textbook examples of maneuvers that no sane pilot would ever attempt. She wasn't just a pilot. She was a force of nature, a weapon in human form, a ghost, a viper. Around the bridge, a few of the older officers who had seen the name on the main screen began to whisper it. The name spread like a contagion of awe. Ghost Viper 1, the younger ensigns looked confused, but they saw the looks on their superiors' faces and fell silent. They understood that they were in the presence of something sacred, something far beyond their comprehension. Thorne stared at the calm blue icon on the tactical display, and for the first time in his long, storied career, he felt a profound and humbling sense of his own insignificance. The XF-99 Wraith settled onto the hangar deck with the impossible softness of a falling leaf. Its landing gear absorbed the final contact with a barely audible sigh of hydraulics. The magnetic clamps engaged with a gentle, definitive click. The silence in the bay was absolute, a stark contrast to the frantic chaos of before. The ground crews stood frozen, their tools held loosely in their hands. They weren't looking at the priceless prototype fighter anymore. They were looking at the cockpit, waiting. Jax Miller stood near the base of the boarding ladder, his helmet held tightly in both hands. The arrogant smirk was gone, wiped clean from his face. In its place was an expression of raw, unvarnished awe. He had rewatched the Wraith's gun camera footage on his cockpit display as he limped back to the ship. He had seen the impossible angles, the preternatural calm, the cascade burn. He had witnessed a god of the void at work, and the experience had shattered his own carefully constructed universe of skill and confidence. He was a child with a toy plane, and he had just seen an eagle hunt. The Wraith's canopy hissed open, breaking the spell. A moment later, Eva Rostova unstrapped herself and swung her legs over the side of the cockpit. She didn't look triumphant or relieved. She just looked weary. A deep, bone-deep weariness that came from briefly becoming something more than human and then having to shrink back into a mortal frame. As her boots touched the top rung of the ladder, Jax Miller straightened his back. His movements were sharp, precise. He drew himself up to his full height and, as Eva's feet touched the deck, he executed the crispest, most formal salute of his life. It was not the perfunctory gesture of a junior officer to a senior. It was the profound, silent acknowledgement of a student to a master, of a warrior to a legend. It was an apology, a thank you, and an oath of fealty all in one. Eva paused for a fraction of a second. She met his gaze, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Not warmth precisely, but a quiet understanding. She gave him a short, almost imperceptible nod. Then she walked past him, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous, silent hangar. When she stepped onto the bridge, the effect was instantaneous. All conversation, all activity, ceased. The low hum of the ship's systems seemed to fade into the background. Every officer on the deck, from the youngest ensign at the navigation console to the most senior commanders, turned and stood at silent, ramrod-straight attention. It was a spontaneous, uncommanded gesture of respect so profound it was almost a religious observance. She ignored them all. Her path was a straight line, directly towards the command station where Admiral Thorne stood waiting. She stopped a respectful 2 paces from him, her posture relaxed but not insubordinate. She stood in her grease-stained jumpsuit, a phantom in the heart of the machine, and waited for the inevitable reprimand for her insubordination, for touching his priceless prototype, for shattering his ordered world. Thorne looked at her. He truly looked at her for the first time, not as a piece of equipment or a name on a roster, but as the woman who had just saved his ship and his crew. He saw the scars around her eyes, the quiet competence in her posture, the deep, ancient weariness in her soul. He looked from her to the tactical replay still looping on a secondary screen, a silent ballet of impossible violence. The disconnect was staggering. The anger was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that remained was the raw, undeniable truth of what he had witnessed. He, Admiral Marcus Thorne, a man who had commanded fleets and decided the fate of star systems, was in the presence of greatness. He did not yell. He did not speak. For a long, silent moment, he simply held her gaze. Then, slowly, with a gravity that stunned the entire bridge crew, he raised his right hand to his brow and rendered a slow, formal salute. It was a gesture he had not made to a subordinate officer in 30 years. It was an apology. It was an acknowledgement. It was a concession of respect from one old warrior to another. His voice, when it finally came, was rough with an emotion he could not name. "Major," he said, his hand still at his brow. He lowered it slowly. "Your station is here. On my bridge." He gestured to the empty tactical command chair, the seat of honor and authority beside his own. Eva looked at the chair, then back at the Admiral. She did not move towards it. She simply offered that same small, economical nod she had given the pilot in the hangar bay. It was an acknowledgement, not an acceptance. Without another word, she turned away from the Admiral and the offered throne of command. She walked back to the small, unassuming diagnostics panel near the aft bulkhead, the place where she had stood when this all began. The bridge crew parted before her like the sea before a prophet. She brought up the post-flight telemetry from the XF-99 Wraith. Her fingers, steady and sure, moved across the holographic interface. Engine stress ratios, microfractures in the airframe from the impossible G-loads, energy cell depletion rates. She was back in her world of data and machines, of facts and figures. She was a mechanic again, tending to her tool. The battle was over. The ghost had returned to its shell. The bridge slowly, hesitantly, came back to life. The activity resumed, but the atmosphere was fundamentally and permanently altered. The crew moved with a new quietness, their voices hushed. They gave Major Rostova's station a wide, respectful berth. They would glance at the woman in the dirty jumpsuit, her brow furrowed in concentration as she analyzed lines of code, and they would remember the phantom who had danced in the void and saved them all. The legend was not a story. It was a quiet woman in her mid-40s who was currently charting the resonance where on the Wraith's portside cannon emitter. Hours passed. The alert condition was secured. The ship returned to its silent, steady course through the nebula. The night cycle was initiated, and the bridge was bathed in the soft, tranquil blue of the low-level displays. Most of the command staff had been replaced by the night watch, but Admiral Thorne remained. He had not left his post. He stood for a long time, watching the star-dusted clouds of the nebula drift past the main view screen. Finally, he moved. He walked to the small galley station and drew a single, steaming mug of black coffee. He walked across the darkened bridge, his footsteps silent on the deck plating. He arrived at Eva's station. She hadn't moved. She was still immersed in the Wraith's data, her focus as absolute as it had been before the battle. She didn't seem to notice him. Thorne didn't speak. He simply reached out and placed the hot mug on the console beside her hand, the ceramic making a soft, solid sound on the metal surface. It was a simple offering, an anchor, a recognition of the human within the legend. Eva's fingers stilled on the console. She slowly turned her head, her gaze first falling on the mug, steam rising from it in a gentle curl, then lifting to meet the Admiral's eyes. They looked at each other for a long moment in the quiet, blue-lit dark of the bridge. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Everything that needed to be said had been said by the silent salute, by the impossible maneuvers, by the simple, profound offering of a cup of coffee. A small, almost imperceptible softening occurred at the corners of her eyes. She reached out and wrapped her calloused fingers around the warm mug. She lifted it, took a slow, deliberate sip, and her gaze drifted from the Admiral to the vast, star-strewn emptiness beyond the viewscreen. The Olympus moved on, a silent ship in the endless dark, carrying its crew and its secrets safely through the night, watched over by a ghost who was, for a moment, just a woman enjoying a quiet cup of coffee. Respect had been paid. The balance had been restored. The Viper was at peace, until the next time the universe decided it needed a legend.